Welcome, dear viewers, to a one-storyteller, where every story is a journey, every character a lesson, and every twist a revelation. Today, we dive into a tale that will grip your heart, challenge your conscience, and leave you questioning the very fabric of justice. This is not just a story. It's a mirror to society, a reflection of the battles fought in the shadows and the karma that waits patiently in the wings. So, grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's unravel the story of a racist cop who set up a black woman only to be hit with karma next. The sun was setting over the city of Crestwood, casting long shadows over the bustling streets. Officer Dan Harris sat in his patrol car, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. He had been on the force for over a decade, but lately his patience was wearing thin. The city was changing, and Dan didn't like it. The neighborhoods he once patrolled with pride were now filled with unfamiliar faces, and his disdain for the outsiders had grown into something darker. Across the street, a young black woman named Tasha Johnson was walking home from work. She had just finished her shift at the local diner, her feet aching and her mind racing with thoughts of her son, Jamal, who was waiting for her at home. Tasha was a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet, and she had no time for trouble. But trouble, as it often does, found her. Dan's eyes narrowed as he watched Tasha cross the street. Something about her demeanor, her confidence, her poise, irritated him. He stepped out of his car, his badge glinting in the fading light, and called out to her. "Ma'am, can I see some ID?" he asked, his tone clipped. Tasha paused, her heart sinking. She had been through this before, the random stops, the unwarranted suspicion. But she knew better than to argue. She handed over her ID, her hands trembling slightly. Dan glanced at the ID, then back at her. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, his voice cold. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Tasha's eyes widened. "For what? I haven't done anything wrong." But Dan wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. Tasha was going to be his scapegoat, his way of proving that he was still in control. He handcuffed her, ignoring her protests, and shoved her into the back of his patrol car. As Dan drove Tasha to the station, his mind raced with possibilities. He knew he didn't have enough evidence to charge her with anything, but that didn't matter. He had a plan. When they arrived at the station, Dan led Tasha to a holding cell, where he left her alone for hours. Meanwhile, he began fabricating a story that would paint Tasha as a criminal, a threat to the community. He planted drugs in her bag, forged documents, and even convinced a fellow officer to back up his claims. By the time Tasha was brought in for questioning, the evidence against her seemed overwhelming. She was charged with possession of illegal substances and resisting arrest. Her bail was set at an amount she could never afford, and she was forced to spend the night in jail. But Tasha wasn't alone. As she sat in her cell, tears streaming down her face, she made a silent vow. She would fight back. She would expose Dan for the corrupt cop he was, and she would clear her name. The next morning, Tasha was released on bail thanks to the help of a local activist group. They had heard about her case and were determined to help her fight the charges. Together, they began to unravel Dan's web of lies. They discovered that Dan had a history of targeting black individuals, often using his position of power to intimidate and oppress. They found witnesses who were willing to testify against him, and they uncovered evidence that proved Tasha's innocence. As the case gained traction, the media picked up the story. Protests erupted across the city, with people demanding justice for Tasha and an end to police brutality. Dan, once confident in his ability to manipulate the system, found himself under scrutiny. The trial was swift and decisive. Dan's lies were exposed, and he was found guilty of multiple charges, including falsifying evidence and abuse of power. He was stripped of his badge and sentenced to prison, where he would have to face the consequences of his actions. But karma wasn't done with Dan yet. In prison, he found himself on the receiving end of the same kind of prejudice and cruelty he had once inflicted on others. He was isolated, despised, and constantly looking over his shoulder. The man who had once wielded power with such arrogance was now powerless, a shadow of his former self. Meanwhile, Tasha's life took a turn for the better. With the help of the activist group, she was able to rebuild her life and provide a better future for her son. She became a symbol of resilience and hope, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. And so, dear viewers, we come to the end of today's story, a story of injustice, resilience, and the undeniable power of karma. Remember, the world may be filled with darkness, but it's up to us to shine a light. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to A1 Storyteller for more tales that inspire, challenge, and transform. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and always believe in the power of a good story. This is A1 Storyteller, signing off.